All right, I'm calling to order the Finance and Administration Committee and the Board of Directors meeting for September 23rd, 2021. The first item of business is to call the roll.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Russell.
Here.
And Chair Kohler.
I'm here. So I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Do we have any public comment on the agenda?
There are none.
Great. Then do we do a roll call vote on the agenda at the committee meetings? Oh, hey,
Yes.
Margie.
Yeah, good
We
morning.
typically
Sorry,
have.
late.
Okay, then let's do that. You think I'd know by now, but the whole Zoom thing has me confused.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
And Chair Kohler.
Aye. Okay, this is now the time for public comment on any item that is not on the agenda. Terry, do we have any public comments?
There are none. Oh, I'm sorry, Rick. Now they're raised. I have two. Rick Adler and Laura Ethel.
Okay.
Mr. Adler.
Yes, on the agenda is the continuation of the virtual meetings, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, correct, sir.
Not on the agenda. I noticed that in the financials that Rainwater is spending about $10 million a year on electricity. I would suggest that you do the research into the opportunity to have some company install solar electricity at their expense, and you continue to pay the electric bill for about 5 years, and then all that solar equipment becomes yours, and then instead of spending $10 million a year, you'll have an income from the excess electricity you produce. That's, I don't have the figures because that would have to be researched, but that's possible these days. I recommend that you go into the solar power business to save yourself money and produce an income when you're not using electricity. And also that you establish these solar arrays at the points of use so that if PG&E cuts off the power due to a fire, you can still continue to maintain your operations with your own solar power and Tesla batteries. So I reckon, and very often water departments do go into the power business and vice versa, historically speaking. So I recommend you do the research and see what's possible. The solar energy is really cheap, pays for itself really quickly, and you can take $10 million off of your budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We can't get into a dialogue with you about that since it's not agendized, but I do want to note that we've spent a lot of time looking into solar, and then maybe when we get to the monthly financial update, you can address that item since it's in the financials. Just maybe provide just a quick preview about where we've been with solar, what we're doing, and where we've landed with that. Because we've looked at it many times over the years that I've served on the board. Do we have any other public comments on items that are not on the agenda?
Yes, we have Laura Ethel.
Okay.
Go ahead, Miss Ethel.
Oh, thank you. I noticed that there are 4 directors present at this meeting. And according to what I see in your handbook, that would make this a board meeting and not just a committee meeting. But if you look at the list of board meetings on your website, this meeting is not listed. So I don't think it's legitimate to call this a board meeting when the public can't find this as a board meeting. Thank you.
Molly, do you want to address that?
Sure,
Since I know
President
you've given
Kohler.
a great deal of thought to how to agendize these items.
We do. We have considered this issue very closely, and we do agendize the items as joint, either a committee meeting or board meetings from time to time. We don't have a quorum of the board available, and so we can still proceed then as a committee meeting. And we do have a policy of not taking action at these meetings unless it's an urgent item. So I think we're fully in compliance with the Brown Act.
Okay. Do we have any other comments that are not on the agenda, Terry?
There are no further comments.
Okay, that brings us to the regular agenda. And the first item is to approve the minutes of the last Finance and Administration Committee Board of Directors meeting of August 26th.
Move
I need a
approval of the minutes.
second,
Do we have any public comment on this item?
There are none. Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
aye,
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and Chair Kohler.
Aye. Our next item is the county's request for emergency drinking water supply.
Yes, good morning, Directors. Paul Cellier, Operations Director. This item was brought to us by the county. Obviously, the drought conditions continuing and persisting, we're seeing now effects through into well water for residents in West Marin that are outside of our service area, hence the county's request for support for these residents. The concept is that the county would qualify residents for this program should the board decide to go forward in terms of need and ability to, store the water in a tank or something of that nature. In concept, we'd provide the county in a very similar fashion a hydrant meter located probably near the treatment plant, San Geronimo treatment plant, where a county contractor, private contractor would pick up the water by truck and take it directly to the residents. So our arrangement would be with the county of Marin as opposed to each of the individual residents. Nonetheless, as I mentioned, the residents are outside of our service area. And this requires that we find that the board would need to have a finding that we have water available for this purpose. The volume of water is expected to be quite small, between 1 and 5 acre feet. In discussions with the county, they were thinking maybe less than 1 acre foot, but in the event that more people qualify for the program than they're anticipating, I've indicated between 1 and 5 acre feet. This is, of course, a very small amount of water for us. Given the emergency need and the persistent drought conditions throughout California and the county, indeed, this would be a beneficial use of our water. So today, this is not the only request that we've received for assistance in respect to the drought. We have received, I think, a letter from the Inverness Public Utility District expressing interest that should the drought continue, would we be in a position, particularly if we were able to construct a water supply project, that they would be able to take advantage of that. So this is sort of the second request from the county that we've received as well. The first, if you recall, back in early May, when the county requested assistance for ranchers out in West Marin. And we've been providing water to ranchers since then, serving on average about 35,000 gallons of water per week through that connection. So today, staff is really seeking direction from the board for this particular request from the county to provide emergency drinking water to residents of West Marin that are outside of our service area.
Okay. Board comments on this.
so Paul, this is treated water,
Yes.
Or-
this is
So-
drinking water.
so we take the water back to Nicasio. Is that right?
So this particular request would be for potable water to be trucked directly to residents in West Marin whose wells are no longer producing.
No, I got that picture on where it's
Okay.
going. The
Yeah.
question is, where does it come from? So, because you said the hydrant's at Nicasio, right? If I understood it correctly.
Sorry, so the hydrant for ranchers is raw water. And
That's the one that's Nicasio.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other one is someplace else.
that would be located near the old golf course, right by the treatment plant.
Okay. So it's basically just the eddy meter idea. The contractor comes up, hooks his eddy meter up, and then we bill him from there, huh?
Yeah.
Seems reasonable to me.
Certainly seems reasonable to me.
Seems reasonable to me too, but I want to just ask that maybe the question of, are these residents, are they in essence adhering to the same conservation restrictions we're asking of our own customers? Is there some way to assess that? I would think so, given if their wells are going dry, that they would probably be very thrifty, but I just think that at a minimum, if that they should be held to the same standards we're asking of our customers.
I think that's a great idea, and we could include that in, I think, what we process a permit or something like that for the use of this water. I do understand they are under conservation restrictions. I don't know exactly how it aligns, but I do think that makes perfect sense to include that.
Although I'm sure, as Monty said, they're probably far more conserving than we are at this point in time because of the situation they're caught in.
I've heard exactly that they have actually stricter regulations than we do. So
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sure
that
that's true, but I think it makes sense to make it explicit. think it also makes it easier for us to explain to our customers.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great idea.
Great. So does staff feel like they've got the direction they need from us?
Yeah, so we'll,
One other thing though, are we bounding this by a cap to be reconsidered if they come back and need more, and is there a time frame as well?
So interesting question. With respect to the time frame, I think it's really a drought question. I think if the drought were to persist, they would probably still be interested in receiving emergency drinking water from us. And then as far as a cap, we can certainly do that. We could come back with some level of frequency of reporting to the board on what that use is.
Paul, I think it makes sense for us to include also a timing in the permit. We'll just come back to the board if it extends, but that way it's not like open-ended. So I think that's, we can do that. So as the next steps, unless there's other questions.
One other, which would be that I'm assuming that there are cost incentives such that if somebody's well comes back online, that they'll stop taking water, but that should maybe be a provision too in what we put forward, that wells that recover in the wintertime will cease receiving water.
You don't need to tell them, Monty. It's 1,000 times more expensive to truck the water than it is to pump it out of the well. So they'll adjust.
Sure.
Yeah, so Paul, in terms of them getting the water, just to be clear with the board, we're asking for them to be able to purchase our potable water out of the service area. Presumably, they'll arrange for a contractor to pick up the water at some specified location, right?
Yes, and I think the county is going to enter that agreement with the hauler and then manage the billing process that way.
Okay, so we'll bring this back for expediency, probably just put it on consent, but addressing all the comments that we've heard today, if that works for the board.
Do we need to be concerned, and I'm thinking we do, about having them take a sample out of the truck and get a coliform analysis on it to show that, So no one looks back to us and say, hey, you know, the water came contaminated.
I think that would be really a county health issue. You know, they'd be picking up the water almost parcel envelope of the treatment plant. It would be hard pressed to see our water losing any chlorine residual at that point.
Paul, we could.
But you don't know what's in the truck, Paul.
Well, what about this, Director Russell? We could have language that just makes it clear that the responsibility of maintaining chlorine residual and ensuring continued, you know, safe drinking water, acceptable water quality is their responsibility.
Okay. Yeah. Like I say, I'm just concerned that, you know, it gets there and it's not meeting standards. And then, you know, the other flip of that, you could also say then that it met all the standards when you picked it up.
Right.
And, you know, what anything you do to it after that is your concern.
Okay, are we good?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. The next, sorry, do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, we have one, Roger Roberts.
Okay,
Go ahead, Mr. Roberts.
Is this contract with the county? And is the county going to enforce your regulations? Is that going to be explicit?
Yes, that's the idea, Mr. Roberts. That was the request we just had from the board to include that in our permit conditions.
Thank you.
No further questions.
okay, great. That brings us to item 3, which is the monthly financial update.
President or directors, bring my screen up here.
You're pretty broken up, Chuck.
If I get close to the microphone, is that any better?
No, it's got some kind of distortion. Maybe you're too close.
Static, like.
Bring my volume down a little bit, helps. Is it any better?
No. We might need to get you some headphones, but we'll just carry on as best we can, okay?
Okay, so you can hear me okay?
We can
Why
hear
don't
you. It's
try
not okay.
maybe dropping off and reconnecting might fix it.
Try
Good
that.
idea, Monty. It's funny, you'd think that with the time we've had with Zoom, not us, but in general, all these problems we work through, but there seems to be new problems
Right.
as time goes on.
Do we want to reorder the items and proceed with the second item? Well,
Actually, that, I think that's a good idea.
Mhm.
Do you want to do the overview of the redistricting process then?
we can certainly do that. I'm going to hand it off to our staff attorney, Jared Mills, to make a quick presentation on that item.
Okay.
Thank you.
Terry, do you have the PowerPoint where you can pull it up, or do I need to share it?
Go ahead and share it, Jared.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Is everyone able to see this?
Mhm.
Yep.
Hold on 1 second. Let me do something different.
While you're doing that, Jared, just let me test my audio. Can you guys hear me now?
That's
Loud
much
and clear
better.
now, Chuck.
Much better,
Okay, great,
Chuck, yeah.
thanks.
Okay, can everyone see my screen now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jared Mills. I'm the staff attorney, and I'll be presenting this item. So this is the kind of initial overview of the redistricting process. And we're just going to be explaining the basic legal requirements that the district has to follow for redistricting. So essentially the district, our enabling act is Water Code section 71,000 and the following sections. Within there, you'll see Water Code section, it's 71540. And that prescribes the process that the board must follow for redistricting. And that points us to elections code section, it's 22,000. That's essentially the redistricting process for special districts. Within that section, elections code 22,000, it requires the district after each census to redistrict to ensure that basically electoral divisions within our service area are as far as practicable, equally in population, and also comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act. Just a quick note, I know I've seen other municipalities and even the county conducting their own redistricting process. That varies from the process that is prescribed for the district through statute. So I just want to point that out. I know that we've received some public comments, asking when we're doing X, Y, or Z. However, it varies the process that we must follow versus these other agencies. A few things that the board may consider in addition to ensuring that the population is as close as possible to equal in each division. And also, obviously in compliance, as I noted, with the Federal Voting Rights Act, is the board can give consideration to the topography of basically the service area and the geography, and then the cohesiveness of and the compactness of the different divisions, and then also the community interest of the divisions. The first two of these are rather explanatory. The topography, we're kind of looking at are there mountain ranges? Is there a body of water dividing districts, things like that. The geography is essentially how the humans and the places that we have developed as humans kind of interact with that topography. And then 3 is really focused on just ensuring that the elected official is kind of in the same area as the individuals that they're representing, and that the districts aren't really spread out. And then 4, the community of interest divisions, this can vary greatly. Usually it's people who share the same economic interest or maybe social interest. This could be, potentially on the economic front, a certain industry prevails in an area. For example, in California, this commonly occurs for, the farming industry versus maybe the urban industry, and just ensuring that everyone's interests are represented through their divisions. Some other considerations that the board may consider whenever we're going through this process, and I'm sure that we'll receive some public comment about, is just ensuring that to the extent possible that our division boundaries align with those of other, say, towns or municipalities throughout the district service territory, because this ensures that the public's very clear when possible that, if I live in this town or this city, my division director is X or Y. And then also this helps with the elections process, because it allows us, in the event that there was ever a special election for a division director, that we would know everyone, for example, in the town of Ross, would get a ballot instead of just portions of that town. The next thing that the board considered or could consider during this process is just the anticipation of future growth. So for example, if we were certain that there's a large development that's going to occur in a certain division, maybe when we're looking at the current numbers, we would allow that district to have a slightly smaller population currently, knowing that, in the next few months that lots of people could be moving into that district. And then the last one is, if, say, an individual or a parcel is kind of on the lines of 2 divisions, and we start shifting them, just acknowledging that the district has staggered elections. So We have 4-year terms for directors, but essentially every 2 years we have directors up for re-election. What this means is we could potentially, inadvertently move voters, and by doing so, they actually wouldn't be allowed to vote for 6 years instead of the regular 4 years. So when possible, just acknowledging that and ensuring that those individuals are maintained in a district so they get the right to vote every 4 years. The public hearing requirements, as I pointed out earlier, these vary from the county and the cities. So just for members of the public and also the board, if you hear the city is doing this or the county's doing this, it's a different process than what we follow. Elections Code section, it's 22,001, requires us to have at least one public hearing on the proposal to adjust the boundaries of any division prior to the public hearing, at which the board considers the actual adjustment and approves or denies that. So the bottom line is we'll have at least 2 public hearings prior to any final adjustments being adopted by the board. And on the timing aspect, this also varies from cities and the county. The cities and counties, I believe that they have to have their maps in place by December of this year. So they're moving, steadfast through this process already, where we're kind of just dipping our toes in the water today with this overview, and then we'll be coming back to the board later. But basically, Elections Code section, it's 22,000. Subsection D says that we can adjust any division boundaries within 180 days preceding the election of a director. The next election for directors will be November 8th, 2022, which is the general election. 180 days prior to that would be that we would need the new divisions in place by at least May 11th of 2022. With that being said, staff recommends that we move through this process faster, acknowledging that the county elections department has redistricting process going on for essentially every city, town, county, and also special districts within the county of Marin. So just ensuring that they have plenty of time to get the district adjustments made and ballots prepared for November is going to be important. So we just want to make sure we have plenty of time for them to be able to do that. One thing that I will note is currently, I know we've had some questions about current division boundaries. If you go to the district's website, marinwater.org, and the link Board of Directors, you can actually scroll down at the bottom. We have an interactive map that shows each division, and also you can kind of interact with the map, zoom in, zoom out to see where those division boundaries are. That's probably the best way to view it. If we print it out and provide hard copies, it's very difficult to see, but that'll allow both board members and members of the public to have a better understanding of the divisions. And then as we move forward through this process, provide comments for potential changes. And with that being said, I'm going to take any questions that the board may have.
Great. Thanks, Jared. That was really comprehensive. Do we have any board questions on this item?
Yes.
Okay.
I found your comment quite interesting, Jared, about the fact that you don't want to shift somebody, a voter, into a situation where they would have a 6-year gap instead of a 4-year gap. So doesn't that end up with, if that criterion holds, doesn't that mean that you can only shift the boundaries in the divisions which share an election date? For instance, Division 2 and Division 5 are mine is 5 and Monty's is 2. Those two share a common boundary in running in the east-west direction along the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. So you could only change it there according to that criterion, if I understand it correctly.
So Director Russell, that's a great question. I think whenever we're looking at this, it's not like a statutory or statutory hard fast rule. It's more just a consideration that the board could make in the event that, say that there's a property that could be shifted between maybe 3 different boundaries, and the consideration could be made to leave them where they'll be able to vote in that next election cycle instead of shifting them so they would be delayed further.
That's a good answer. I just curious. I hadn't heard that before, that consideration before. We've all been through at least one, well, not Monty, but everybody else has been through one census change. I remember doing this once before.
Yeah, I think that's right. Jack's probably done it more. I'm just aware that we have a fairly full agenda, so I just want to be sure that we're moving through this item. Does anybody have any comments? It seems the staff recommendation is very reasonable. Any other board comments on this? Okay, Terry, do we have any public comments on this? Terry?
You're on mute, Terry.
Thank you. We have two, Laura Epple, then Roger Roberts. Ms. Epple?
Yes, can members of the public, or me in particular, can we obtain copies of Mr. Mills' PowerPoint presentation?
It's up on the website already, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Roberts?
I'm sorry.
Mr. Roberts? Hello, sir?
We have in Marin, depending upon who is drawing the maps, either 5 or 7 different climate zones. Is that taken into consideration with respect to boundaries for the districts of the members of the board?
Jared, can you answer that, or Molly?
Yeah, so I would say that that would definitely be a consideration that could be raised during the future public hearings on this item, and the board could consider that if that's something that that they would relate to potentially being a community of interest or a factor that they would like to consider.
No further questions.
Okay.
It's a good question, Roger.
Yeah. All right, I think I'm hearing the board consensus on the board to move forward with staff's recommendation. Any objections to going forward in this way, guys?
No.
Okay. That brings us to, should we go back to item 3, the monthly financial update?
I think that would be best. Chair Kohler.
Hi, good morning again, Chair Kohler and directors. I hope you can hear me better now and you can see my screen. So this will,
Yeah.
all right, great. This will be an update for the August financials. So we'll start off with revenues, and if you're following along in your packet, attachment 3 gives you a breakdown of some of these numbers. I would like to start out just pointing out a typo that we have in attachment 3 also. In the column there, it says actuals as of July 31. That's actually as of the end of August, not July. Just to clear up any confusion there. So revenues, we're, again, if we're looking at a straight line where we would be at 16.7% for budget, so just keep that as a reference in the back of your mind. So revenues, it looks like we're right on, as we'll show you in the next slide. That's really not accounting for seasonality. We're actually quite a bit behind on revenues, but we're at $14.1 million for the water revenues. And if you're looking at attachment 3 there, you can see that that's comprised of water sales of about $9.8 million, service charges of 3.5, and then we've got watershed management fee of there of $800,000 for that balance of $14.1 million. And then other revenues, those things like rents, grants, and interest that we get is at about $500,000. And again, tracking right on, if not just a little bit ahead of a straight line budget number. So that brings our total revenues to 16.4% for the year, or $14.6 million. And then the fire flow fee, we've only collected $100,000 that year to date, but again, that's on the property tax rolls, and that comes in 2 slugs, basically in January and May, following those remittances. And then capital revenues, which is primarily capital maintenance fee, is at $2.8 million, and that's 15.4% of revenue. So that is tracking pretty close to budget there. So as I mentioned, is if we kind of dissect those revenue
I have a quick comment, Chuck.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the next time the issue comes up about the ratio of fixed charges to sales, you should be prepared to quote the numbers you just gave us. That I just did a quick calc. It appears to me that 70% of our revenue is generated from water sales.
That's probably about right. Yep.
You know what, remember what they're saying is we've adjusted it and it's no longer, people are no longer subject to the cost of the usage of their water. Well, that's simply not true. 70% of their bill is coming from how much water they use.
Correct. Right. Yeah, it's a good point,
Thanks.
Director Russell. And just to your point there, Director Russell, you kind of see that on this slide there. So you can see what this would comprise, an aggregate bill for the entire district. And you can see what the actual component water sales there in that first column, that's just the commodity sale. And then the service charge and the watershed fees, those fixed fees are those next two columns.
Yes, sir. Same thing.
Yeah. So you can kind of see that graphically there. And as I mentioned before, this shows our budget to actual. So, when we line these up and we take July and August numbers, it looks like we're, right on budget, 16.7% for revenues. However, if you look at the way that these consumptions are laid out over the year, we normally have about 23% of our revenues in July and August. Right now we're 16.7. So you can see that we're actually quite a bit behind on what our budgeted sales were. And then if you go back and look at attachment 1 in your package, we also give you the last year's actuals, so you can look at that. And we're down quite a bit compared to our actuals too. And then you can see here how we're doing with service charges for the month. And service charges and watershed fees are kind of stabilizing factors here as they are fixed fees. And here we're looking at the comparison with the previous years. So these are the water sales, including the meter service charge and the watershed maintenance fees. And you can see the comparison with the prior year. Prior year is the red bars here. So you can see in 21, we were at about $10.3 million, and we dropped down to $8.4 million as of this August. And you can see that we're kind of following the same pattern in the previous year. So this August drop from the prior years is a 19% drop, 18% drop if you're looking at July to the previous July. So again, we're, for quite a while when we were meeting with the board, we did not see these the conservation showing up in our numbers. Now we really are seeing that. And then we kind of look at this through the lens of the actual usage of the commodity and acre feet. And you can see that we have a substantial drop, about 1,100 acre feet compared to 5,200 in total in the previous year. So that's about a 21% drop just in the commodity. And you can see the really market drop there in single family, dropping down by about 23% there year over year. And then we always show you this historical look at the different tiers, and it's really a pretty static look. One of the interesting things is you can see the comparison of the drought that we had in 16 to the current year, and you see pretty similar trends. One thing that you do see that's kind of interesting is we always kind of assume that tier 4 is pretty inelastic, and this doesn't really offer a price elasticity look, but you see a drop there in tier 4 of about 50%. It's a pretty substantial drop compared to the previous year as we enter the drought. And then tiers 2 and 3 drop by about 39% in both tiers. And then you can see that tier 1 is relatively stable. We had a drop there, but it's only about 8% compared to the prior year, just looking at that tier. Just kind of interesting to see how those move very similar to the way they did in fiscal year 16. And then again, we kind of delve into a little more detail here and look at real-time data that we get from our AMI meters in the Tiburon Belvedere area. And this is just residential, Resi Code 1. But again, you can see from this real-time data for August, you can see how we look compared to the previous 2 years. So if you're looking at August of this year compared to last year and then the year before, just compared to last year, we've got a 28% drop this month, and we had 25% drop in July. So when we look at the real-time data, we're really seeing the effects of conservation or messaging or whatever that is, we really see people cutting down on water usage. And we see some of the same data. We look at a smaller sample size of 82 meters, and this is these are business meters throughout the district. And here you didn't see as big of a decrease in July. We saw about 13% decrease there, but then when we hit August here, we see about 21% decrease. So again, those are falling rapidly too. And then we'll turn to the expenditure side. Just again, about 17% would bring you through 2 months of the year on the budget, just for a kind of a yardstick there, so you can see where we're at. Personnel services, we're just slightly ahead of budget. And I think what you're seeing there is some additional overtime that we've had for water patrol. So we're just slightly ahead on the personnel budget there. Maintenance operating expenses are, again, just very slightly ahead of budget, 17.6%. And again, not surprising, as we've been spending additional money on things like printing and creating flyers and conservation effects by the district. Financing costs is right on budget, and that's because we take those biannual payments that we make on the bonds, and we just spread those over 12 months evenly. And then the capital allocation, which is the portion that we book mostly from personnel services to capital projects, is 15.3%. So budget, we're running 17.7 overall compared to 16.7. Again, for all practical purposes, we're about spot on budget there. And then fire flow projects, we spent $500,000, about 11% through the budget. And then district projects, including capital equipment costs, we're about 6.3% of budget. However, as we've told you before, we have to look at what the encumbrances are. So there's projects that we have underway that we've contracted for. We just haven't actually expended the cash yet. And when we add those in, that's another $7.7 million in capital encumbrances. So the capital spending is actually quite a bit higher. So when you add those together, we're actually about 20% overall, including capital, of the total budget. And then we'll look at what our fund balances are, as we always do here. You can see a restricted designated fund. So those are things for like general liability that we pay, that we restrict for those purposes. That's stable at $19.9 million. The rate stabilization fund has fallen $7.9 million, and we'll do a quick reconciliation of that on the next slide. Fire flow fund is healthy at $2.7 million. Pension reserves has not moved in quite some time. It remains $2 million. Capital funds at $21.3 million. And then the operating unrestricted fund, which we kind of think of as our reserve in conjunction with our rate stabilization fund, that's at $24.3 million. And again, we'll give you a reconciliation of that on the next slide here. Operating fund balance to budget in months. Again, our policy target is 6 months. We're at 3.3. Debt service coverage is very healthy, projected at 3. Outstanding debt is about $140 million. And then other debt, those smaller issues that we have, like with the Las Colinas, are $6.9 million. So I told you we do a reconciliation of our reserves. So on the top here, we have the rate stabilization fund, and then below here, we have the operating unrestricted fund. So this is activity that we've taken since the beginning of the fiscal year. We started out at July 1st with $9.4 million in the rate stabilization fund. We transferred $500,000 out for the emergency intertie project. We transferred out $500,000 for Castania. And then we had $500,000 for a contingency fund, and that was to fund operating costs associated with communications and conservation. So dropping down to that left us $7.9 million, and so $1.5 million came out of that fund balance. And then dropping down to the operating unrestricted fund, we started the fiscal year with $28.9 million. And you can see that transfer in from the rate stabilization fund for contingency. And then out of contingency, we use that for drought-related operating costs. So that's everything from temporary help to postage to community outreach, advertising, just a whole bunch of things that have gone into that drought-related operating costs. And then we have water conservation costs, and those are strictly monies that we pulled out of the contingency for rebate plans. And that's not saying that that's all we spent on conservation rebate programs. They're likely front loading their budgets for that and have already started dipping into contingency. So we will likely be putting more money out of rate stabilization into contingency as we go forward. Then operating cost net of revenue. So this is basically the effects that the shortage of revenues are having on us. That's $4.6 million that we're taking out of there. So when we end, we went from $28.9 million at the beginning of the year down to $24.3 million in ending balance. Not really surprising. That's about what we expected for this kind of drought. And then in summary, whereas we didn't see it for quite a few months because of our billing cycle, we are definitely now starting to see the impact that the drought is having on revenues. The expenditures, as we showed you, are tracking pretty well with budget, but we are adding dollars in there to deal with conservation communications. And then we do see our reserve balances declining. I wouldn't say that they're declining at an alarming rate right now, and that will probably slow a little bit as we head into the lower usage months in the winter months. But definitely something that we're keeping an eye on. That's the end of my presentation. If members have any questions.
Thanks, Jack. It's really well done. I'm sorry, Jack, so you have a question to start with?
Yeah, I do. I just, a couple of things on the budget to actual comparison. There's a couple of things that jumped out at me. One is the insurance, including claims, is 90% of budget. I'm sure there's some explanation for that, but what is it?
You're right. Yes, Director, there is an explanation for that. And the explanation is very simply that we pay insurance at the beginning of the fiscal year.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you remember, well, the budget captures a lot of that, but remember too, that our insurance costs went up substantially when we went out this year.
Right. It doesn't necessarily reflect a greater number of claims, is I guess my concern. No.
That's primarily premiums.
Yeah. And then also another one, not as out of sync as much, but just electrical power. Was 20.
Yeah, electrical power is running a little bit ahead at 25% compared to, we'd see it's 16.7%. But again, I would, Director, I would say that electrical power is probably going to fluctuate with the demand for water.
Right.
So we're comparing those two higher months of July and August. You're going to have higher electrical demands in those months than you would say in the winter.
Right. Right.
And actually, if you don't mind, Jack, this might be a good place to ask Ben to circle back on that question about solar. I mean, I know we're not prepared to do a whole presentation, but I know we've spent a lot of time considering how we incorporate solar into our electrical portfolio.
Sure. I'll touch on some points, President Kohler. We do have solar arrays. We have solar arrays on our administration building and our maintenance shop. We continue to look for new sites where specifically as we rehabilitate our large water tanks, we're looking at opportunities to put solar on the rooftops. We do buy deep green power from MCE. That was the exact question, but we are doing that. We're also currently completing a study with UC Davis on opportunities for small hydropower, micro turbines, not solar, but another renewable energy source. In the comment of, ideally you put solar at point of use. I mean, it's absolutely the ideal model. Of course, the challenge for us is our heavy point of use is basically, on the watershed at the treatment plants and in the large pump stations, and finding the acreage for solar for that kind of power demand would be quite challenging. But what we continue to
I think you should state, Ben, what the power demand is. I think the gentleman doesn't realize that we're running 500 horsepower motors, 600 horsepower motors, and that we're talking about megawatts.
Yeah, right. That's a good point. I don't know offhand our kind of total power, but right, it is on the order of what we're talking about. I don't know the acreage, Director Russell, you probably have that, but that you would need, but it'd be far, far more than, we aren't going to tear down, tens or more acres in the watershed to put on solar arrays, I imagine.
Great. And we can come back to that. I just wanted to see if we had a quick answer. But to get back to the monthly financial update, any other board comments on this before we go to public comment?
Well, let's go back to the solar for just 1 second.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
The gentleman also indicated we'd be able to run without PG&E, understanding that the battery array for a megawatt, it's got to be $20 million or something like that, or $10 million. It's a huge number to have a battery backup for that kind of power draw.
Okay. Any other comments on the financial update? Okay, I just want to thank Chuck. It's as usual, very, very compelling, very well put together, and a little stressful. Any public comments on this item?
There are none. There are none.
Great. That brings us to item 5, which is the grant and legislative program update.
Good morning, board members. This is Matt Sigas, the Grant and Legislative Program Coordinator. I'm sharing my screen here. This morning, I'm going to give you an update on the status of recent grant applications, upcoming funding opportunities for priority drought projects, an update on our COVID relief funding efforts, and updates on bills that we're tracking in the legislature. So in July, the board approved a grant from the Coastal Conservancy in the amount of nearly $1.1 million for forest health work on the watershed. Just last month, we received an award from CAL FIRE's Forest Health Program in the amount of $3.5 million, also for wildfire reduction work on the watershed. In July, through Senate Bill 129, we submitted a member request to the office of Assemblymember Mark Levine to seek funding for the emergency repair of Pine Mountain Tunnel. Due to the hard work of Assemblymember Levine and his office, we will receive a $1 million award to help finance this project. Additionally, our grant award to perform work at Azalea Hill was recently increased from $700,000 to $850,000, with additional funding being made available by State Parks work on the active transportation program. For perspective, these recent awards of nearly $6.5 million in grants is the largest single-year sum Marin Water has received in the last several decades, and we're still going. We've applied for 3 more grants or loans, as you can see on the screen, and the focus for the remainder of the year is on seeking funding for priority drought projects. Just to go back quickly to the CAL FIRE grant, I realized this was brought to the Watershed Committee recently, this information, but I just wanted to underscore that this award represents a collaboration between the district, Parks Conservancy, and Marin County Parks. Of the $3.5 million award from CAL FIRE, approximately $3.1 million will go to the district for forest health work on the watershed, as indicated by the map. And the remainder will be divided among Marin County Parks and Parks Conservancy for project work. And I'll point out too, this grant complements work that is currently underway, which was funded by the State Coastal Conservancy. So with respect to funding of priority district projects, the recent passage of budget trailer bills by our state legislature, as well as infrastructure funding at the federal level, is providing opportunities which we are pursuing. At the state level, the most significant funding has come through the $2.5 billion drought relief package, which was detailed in Senate Bill 129, which was a budget trailer bill. In that package, we're tracking allocations to the State Water Board, particularly the $650 million for drinking water projects and the $85 million for water recycling projects. The Department of Water Resources was allocated $100 million for water conveyance. Both DWR and the State Water Board are being monitored for solicitations which may fund district projects, particularly the emergency intertie project. In the next several weeks, DWR is expected to make up to $200 million available in a solicitation for multi-benefit drought-related projects. At the federal level, we're tracking the infrastructure bill, which was passed in late August by the Senate, and is still awaiting signature from President Biden. Once signed, the bill will send more than $23 billion to state revolving funds, or SRFs, for projects. California's cut is estimated to be $3.5 billion. Additionally, $55 billion will go to the EPA for drinking water projects, which will be administered through its WIFIA program. The district will also seek funding from WaterSmart programs. WaterSmart has just announced 3 new rounds of funding, one of which provides up to $2 million for emergency intertie projects. The district has identified priority projects and will seek funding for those projects from agency programs as they become available. With the recent passage of state and federal budgets, many solicitations have not yet been announced, but have been, not yet been released, but are expected for later this fall or in early 2022. The district priority projects include water conservation, the emergency intertie, and infrastructure projects such as the repair of Pine Mountain Tunnel. Additionally, district staff will continue to seek funding from the American Rescue Plan Act and other avenues. Most recently, the State Water Board announced its arrearage program, which will distribute $1 billion among eligible water agencies. The district applied to that program on September 10th. Additionally, the Department of Finance just announced a $100 million fund for independent special districts to recover COVID-related expenses, and we expect to apply for those funds as well. So just briefly, a legislative update. Staff continue to track legislative bills of interest to the district. In late July, the state legislature passed Senate Bill 427, which was subsequently signed into law by Governor Newsom. The law allows water agencies to adopt ordinances and penalties which exceed previously set penalties, for water theft. Marin Water already has existing water theft penalties and a procedure that staff follows. SB 427 only increases the penalties that a local agency may assess for water theft. However, SB 427 does not become effective until January 1st, 2022. If the board desires, staff will bring a future item to the board that discusses potential increases to our water theft penalties and possible revisions to the water theft procedure consistent with SB 427. Additionally, staff tracked the passage of a trailer bill establishing an arrearage program for COVID relief, which I previously mentioned. Assembly and Senate Bills 148 established a $1 billion fund, which was administered by the State Water Board. And we believe that some portion of that is likely to be apportioned to Marin Water based on our September 10th response to their survey. In summary, we are successfully securing funding for wildfire reduction. We're prioritizing drought relief projects for new applications, and we continue to track key legislation and funding opportunities. Thank you.
That was great, Matt. That was really, really helpful. I think we should have you do this at all the finance committee meetings because I felt really far behind on all of this. So I think it'd be great to have that. Any board comments on this item?
Agree with you completely. I think that's a great idea to incorporate it into the meetings.
Yeah, I did.
Because I just don't think Matt goes to enough meetings. I think, any further board comment? Okay, Terry, do we have any public comment on this item?
I can't see, sorry, because the screen was up. Hold on. Yes, there are several.
Okay.
First, Roger Roberts. Go ahead, sir.
Yes,
Go ahead.
yes. Can any of the money from these sources be used for planning or environmental review? And then I have a comment because I didn't, on the last presentation, because I didn't hit the button fast enough. But I'd like to ask this question first.
Matt, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, Roger, that's a great question. My take from listening to the state is they want to prioritize implementation of projects which are ready. However, there may be some money available for planning or environmental review. It kind of depends on the project.
And the comment I have on the prior presentation is I noticed that the rate stabilization fund was being used to help proceed with the planning for the intertie project. When you bond finance the intertie project, will there be money in that bonding to refund the money taken from the rate stabilization fund? If not, that should be the case.
Would you like me to address that, President Cole?
That'd be great.
Yeah, the very simple answer is yes. We can reimburse ourselves. That was one of the resolutions included in the bond documents the other night, or the bond package. We can reimburse ourselves for expenses we spent prior to getting bond proceeds or the sale of bonds. So yes.
Thank you.
There are actually no further comments.
Okay, great. That brings us to our last item, which is reestablishing in-person meetings.
Yes, and I can move really quickly, Chair Kohler. So staff was initially looking at reestablishing in-person meetings due to the fact that Executive Order N0821 was set to expire September 30th. However, legislation was passed and signed into law, AB 361, which now would allow the board, all public agencies actually, the option to continue virtual meetings. So what we're proposing at this time, what staff's proposing, is that pursuant to AB 361, the board would meet virtually on October 5th. That is allowed under the law, the new law, and would be able at that time to consider in more in-depth discussion and action item as to whether they want to, the board wants to proceed with virtual meetings. And we can have also a discussion of the options for if the board is interested in the alternatives. But the virtual meeting option would is in place where there's a proclamation of emergency, and the board has determined that in-person meetings would be an imminent threat to health and safety of attendees, and actually just learned of a county action item that's going forward September 28th, and a letter from the health officer of the county recommending continued social distancing. So I think it the staff will be digging into that a bit more for the October 5th meeting, but I think the takeaway today is that we would be meeting virtually on October 5th, and that we would have an action item for the board to consider whether to continue virtual meetings at that time.
What about the provisions of the Brown Act and the posting of the agenda where we are located? Is that still waived as it was before October 1st?
That's correct. Under the determinations that would be acted on pursuant to AB 361, those provisions would not apply. So everything that we're doing currently with our virtual meetings would still be in place, and all of our actions are actually consistent with the requirements of AB 361 if the board were to decide to continue virtual meetings.
And what about the provision of a hybrid in the future? Are we going to discuss that at that time? This
yes,
idea
I think that would be an appropriate to include discussions of the hybrid meeting as an option for the board to consider October 5th.
I think it's important for the listeners to understand that what we're talking about is the need to notice the location where people speak at the meeting. So the current law, as I understand it, is that in order to participate in the meeting, a public member would have to be at a location where it's noticed in order to speak.
Well, actually, Director Russell, I think we can address that more October 5th, but it's really for board members who want to participate in meetings virtually. The existing Brown Act requirements without the emergency provisions would require that a board member provide a location where the board member would be and post the agenda at that location, make the location available for the public to be at that remote location, and that there be a quorum of the board members in person in the jurisdiction in order for the teleconferencing of one or potentially two board members to occur. All of that, of course, has been suspended. And if the board makes a decision to proceed with virtual meetings, that would continue to be suspended for the time being.
And is there a sunset on AB 131 or whatever it is?
There is, I think that was in the staff report. It's 2024. I believe it's January 1st, 2024.
A long time out. Okay.
Well, to be clear, that's the legislation, but the legislation also does anticipate that the virtual meetings could be put in place only during the proclamation of emergency. So we're still under a proclamation of emergency by the state. But if that were to be terminated, then the virtual meeting allowance would also cease to exist.
One more quick question. Do we have any idea what the other agencies in the county are doing?
Yes, we do, Director Russell, and our board secretary has looked at that closely. She can answer questions on that now, or we can also include that in the October 5th discussion, up to you.
I'm cool. It doesn't matter to me.
Okay. I know some are short on time, so I just wanted to be sensitive to that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Do we have any further board comment on this item before we move to public comment? Okay.
As somebody who has only been in these virtual meetings since I was elected, I don't know, and I'll humbly admit that I did not attend any board meetings prior to being elected, so I don't know what attendance has looked like by the public, but I know that we have often had members of the public express the desire to have access. And so I think that as a fundamental purpose of the Brown Act, it'd just be good as we consider, and I'm willing to wait until our next meeting to hear more details, but it'd be great to see how this has shifted attendance and made it more possible for people to attend and participate. I think is another, obviously, is an important thing for people to be able to weigh in. So I think that's
It's an interesting question, Monty. I think our attendance is down from the normal with the virtual of the public.
I'm not sure I agree, Larry. We regularly have 40, 50 people. We never have that. We never have that.
I don't agree with you on the 40, 50 people, Cynthia. I think maybe 20.
Terry, what do you think? I mean,
I agree with you, actually, Director Kohler. I mean, if you look at the list of attendees,
well,
they may not be speaking as much.
Let's get the count, Terry, because we don't have the people who used to come, like Ann Thomas and the routine people who came. They're not coming.
Yeah.
The standing.
Okay.
And I would say, Monty, in general, it went from 5 to 100, depending on what the situation was.
I think you have to take into consideration that we have more issues going on right now than we have at previous normal times. And that would impact the number of people attending in any event. So it's hard to make a comparison.
I think that's true. I need to go. Do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. To Baron Hamill, then Rick Adler, please. Ms. Hamill.
Okay, I'm with all apologies to the public commenters. I have to go. I'm already 10 minutes late for my next meeting. So I'm going to turn this over to, I think, Larry Russell, just to finish off the meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Ms. Hamill.
Hi, thank you.
Jack may be vice chair.
I am vice chair, but I have the same problem, so I say leave it with Larry. Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Hamill. Ms. Hamill.
Thank you. I appreciate the concern about having the public coming into an environment that might be unsafe for people with vulnerable health issues. And I know with my own all things Apple classes being taught through a couple of the Marin libraries, when I was teaching live before the pandemic, I had an average of about 50 people per class. Now with Zoom, my attendance is 250 people per class. Yeah, which is kind of amazing. And some of my students are participating from other countries and from all parts of America. Now, obviously, that's not a criteria for you. You're more concerned about people who are in the region. But what I'd like to point out is that we are also looking at, when we return to live classes, how to do this as a hybrid so that we have people in the live audience who want to participate in person, and to look at ways of streaming or giving access to other participants via Zoom and or YouTube live streaming. Now, with the live streaming on YouTube, they cannot ask questions unless it's done through a chat, which needs an administrator, et cetera. It becomes more complicated. But right now, the criteria for access should be taken under consideration is the health, that people would be coming from a greater distance, perhaps, and not so much in Marin County, but also the issue of parking and traffic. So those are things that I would like to see considered as you move forward in your discussion about whether to continue your meetings available via Zoom so people can participate. Thank you again for your consideration.
Understand that it is completely outside of our control. The Brown Act is the controlling consideration here. So as Molly explained, we are operating in a situation under this emergency provision that allows the Brown Act to be suspended, portions of the Brown Act. And that's really the condition. We don't have any say about the Brown Act. We have to comply. And the Brown Act is the one that sets these rules, which are set in the 60s when the Brown Act was passed, in the thinking, like the telephones and things like that. They never envisioned smartphones or internet or live streaming or any of those other things. We are, I think, speaking for myself at least, and probably for the board, we're all in favor of it. But we have to work within the constraints of the Brown Act.
Mr. Adler?
Yes, I'm in favor of the virtual meetings. I recommend for the health and safety and the ease and efficiency of the board, the staff, the people interested in attending meetings, and the spirit of open public meetings of the Brown Act, that we continue the virtual meetings. And with that provision, for those without the technology or the ability necessary to attend meetings virtually, the establishment of a streaming screen in the meeting room of the MMWD offices, operated by staff members. So upon request, masked and vaccinated members of the public without devices can attend the virtual meetings. The deadly COVID virus, especially the Delta variety, is still circulating and infecting people in Marin, often invisibly, innocently carried by people without symptoms. The infection transmission is greatly enhanced when people are crowded into closed meeting rooms, talk loud enough to be heard, often for too many hours. The longer the exposure, the more danger. Whereas the Zoom meetings are all varieties, virus-free, safe. Very easy to attend, saving hours of driving, parking, setup time, close down time. Much easier to hear and follow, especially the presentations, much easier to see. And all the info, statements, decisions are automatically recorded and available for review. Zoom meetings are much more pleasant, efficient, easy, safe, and thus have much greater public participation and much easier for the board and staff. Therefore, I recommend and request that the meetings remain virtual. At this point in time, we can't afford for any of the board members or staff to get sick and lose all their knowledge and expertise. And we can't afford for any of the members of the public to get sick either. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. We hear you loud and clear and appreciate your comments. As I said, really those comments, if you don't mind me suggesting, you convey those comments to Mark Levine and to Mike McGuire. And it's really in the legislature's hands more than it is in our hands. We are the people who have to comply with the Brown Act. We can't change the Brown Act. So they can change the Brown Act, but we can't. So your thoughts are great. Just convey that, and I agree with them completely. Convey them to our assemblyman and our state senator. And I think, Ben, it makes sense to look into Mr. Adlet's idea about, I don't know how much demand we would have, having a screen in the boardroom, to have it available if anybody can't access.
So we'll brief the board at the upcoming meeting. We are looking at technology, so the board does have alternatives of one decision currently, and then post-COVID, the direction you'd like us to go. So we'll have a good discussion on that next time.
Maybe we could make like a drive-in, have a big screen on the outside and park in the parking lot. Okay, great. I think that's it, huh?
That's correct.
Monty, Jack, any comments?
Good discussion.
Okay, cool. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We'll
Thank
adjourn the
you.
meeting. Bye-bye.